A man slapped my wife because she wouldn't give him her number. He found out I was sitting right behind her. My wife Colleen and I had a tradition every Friday night. We would go to a bar called the Copper Rail downtown and sit at opposite ends of the counter. We did this because we thought it was fun. We had been married for 9 years, and we liked to pretend we were strangers meeting for the first time. She would sit at one end, and I would sit at the other, and eventually one of us would walk over and start a conversation like we had never met. It sounds silly, but it kept things interesting. We had been doing it for almost 2 years, and the bartenders knew us well. They thought it was sweet. That Friday started like any other. Colleen came in first and took a seat at the far end of the bar near the window. I came in 10 minutes later and sat at the opposite end near the door. We made eye contact once and smiled, but didn't acknowledge each other beyond that. The plan was for me to walk over in about 20 minutes and pretend to hit on her. I was sipping my drink and watching a basketball game on the TV above the bar when a man sat down next to Colleen. He was tall with slicked back hair and an expensive watch. He had the look of someone who had never been told no in his life. I watched him lean toward my wife and say something. She smiled politely and shook her head. He said something else. She shook her head again and turned away from him. Most people would have taken the hint. This man didn't. He kept talking. He kept leaning closer. He put his hand on her arm and she pulled it away. I started to get up from my seat, but the bar was crowded and I was on the other side of a large group of people. I couldn't get to her quickly without shoving through everyone. I watched Colleen say something firm. Her body language made it clear she wanted him to leave her alone. She held up her left hand and showed him her wedding ring. The man looked at the ring and laughed. He said something I couldn't hear. Then he reached out and grabbed her wrist. Colleen tried to pull away, but he held on tight. She said something sharp and loud enough that the people around them started to notice. The man's face changed. He went from confident to angry in less than a second. He said something through his teeth and then he did it. He slapped her across the face with his free hand. The sound cut through the noise of the bar. Colleen's head snapped to the side. She grabbed her cheek and looked at him with shock. A few people nearby gasped, but nobody moved to help. The man let go of her wrist and stood up from his stool. He straightened his jacket like nothing had happened. He said she should learn some manners. I was already moving. I had pushed through the crowd before he finished his sentence. He didn't see me coming. He was too busy adjusting his cuffs and looking pleased with himself. I grabbed him by the shoulder and spun him around. Before he could react, I hit him with a right hook that connected with his jaw. He stumbled backward into the bar. His expensive watch clinked against the wood. He looked up at me with fury and asked who I was. I told him I was her husband. His face went pale. He hadn't expected that. He thought Colleen was alone. He thought she was lying about being married. He thought he could put his hands on a woman in public and nobody would do anything about it. He was wrong. He tried to swing at me, but he was slow and clumsy. I dodged it easily and hit him again, this time in the stomach. He doubled over and gasped for air. I grabbed his collar and pulled him up straight. I asked him if he felt like a big man now. He didn't answer. I asked him if hitting women made him feel powerful. He still didn't answer. He was too busy trying to breathe. I hit him one more time in the face. His nose made a sound I won't forget. Blood started pouring down his chin and onto his white shirt. He fell against a bar stool and then slid to the floor. The bartender came around the counter and told me that was enough. I stepped back with my hands up. I wasn't looking for trouble. I just wanted to make sure this man understood what he had done. Two of his friends came over from a table in the back. They helped him up and looked at me like I was the problem. One of them asked what was wrong with me. I pointed at Colleen, who was still holding her face with tears in her eyes. I told them their friend just slapped my wife because she wouldn't give him her number. The friends looked at each other. Then they looked at the man with the bloody nose. One of them asked if that was true. The man with the bloody nose didn't answer. He was holding a napkin to his face and staring at the floor. His friend asked again, louder this time. Did you hit that woman? The man still didn't answer, which was all the confirmation his friends needed. The taller one shook his head and stepped back from him. He said, "We're done." He looked at me and said, "We didn't see anything." He drove himself here. Then both friends walked back to their table, grabbed their jackets, paid their tab, and left through the side door without looking back. They abandoned him on the floor of a bar with a broken nose and blood on his shirt and not a single person in the building willing to help him up. The bartender, whose name was Gabe and who had been pouring our drinks every Friday for 2 years, came around the counter with a rag and a bag of ice. He handed the ice to Colleen. Then he looked at the man on the floor and said, "You need to leave. Right now. Don't come back." The man pulled himself up using the bar. His nose was still bleeding and his eyes were swollen and his shirt looked like someone had thrown a glass of red wine at it. He looked at me with the kind of hatred that comes from being embarrassed in public by someone you underestimated. He said, "You'll be hearing from my lawyer." I said, "You slapped a woman in a bar full of witnesses and cameras. Please call your lawyer. I'll wait." He looked up at the ceiling. There were 2 security cameras pointing directly at the bar area. His face shifted. Whatever fantasy he had about making this my problem had just died under a small black dome with a blinking red light. He looked at Colleen one more time. She was holding the ice to her cheek and looking at him with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not fear, not sadness, disgust. The kind of deep, complete disgust that tells someone they have been permanently filed away as the worst version of a human being she had ever encountered. He walked out without another word. Gabe locked the door behind him even though the bar was still open. He said, "We're done admitting people for the night." Then he turned to Colleen and me and said, "Drinks are on the house. Both of you stay as long as you want." I sat down next to Colleen for the first time that night. Our little game was over. The pretend strangers thing didn't feel fun anymore. It felt like a setup that had almost gone wrong in a way I hadn't accounted for. I had always known there was a risk that someone would approach her. That was part of the game. The idea was that I would walk over at the right moment and she would pretend not to know me and we would flirt like new people and then drive home together laughing about it. Nobody was supposed to get hurt. Nobody was supposed to get hit. I looked at Colleen's face. The left side was red and starting to swell. You could see the outline of his fingers on her cheek. I touched it gently and she winced. I said, "We're going to the hospital." She said, "It's just a slap." I said, "He grabbed your wrist first and hit you hard enough to leave a mark. We're going." She didn't argue. She knew why I wanted it documented. We drove to the emergency room. It was a Friday night, so the wait was long, and the waiting room was full of people who looked like their nights had gone wrong in various ways. A man with a cut above his eye, a teenager holding his arm at a wrong angle, a woman coughing into a mask. We sat in plastic chairs under fluorescent lights, and Colleen held the melting ice pack to her face, us, and neither of us said anything for a long time. A nurse triaged Colleen quickly once she saw the bruising on her face and the red marks on her wrist that were already darkening into something uglier. They took photos, clinical photos, front of the face, side of the face, close-up of the wrist, each one taken against a white background with a ruler held next to the bruise for scale. Colleen stood there under harsh lighting while a stranger documented the outline of a man's fingers on her skin, and I stood in the corner of the room watching the woman I had been married to for 9 years be turned into evidence. They documented everything. The doctor said there was no fracture in her cheekbone, but there was significant soft tissue swelling, and the wrist had minor bruising, consistent with someone gripping it with force and intent. He said that last part carefully, with force and intent, like he wanted to make sure those words ended up in the record. He asked Colleen if she wanted to file a police report. She looked at me. I said yes. She said yes. 2 officers came to the hospital and took our statements. I told them exactly what happened from the moment the man sat down next to my wife to the moment he walked out of the bar with a broken nose. They asked if I was willing to identify him. I said yes. They asked if there were witnesses. I said the entire bar saw it. They asked about cameras. I gave them Gabe's number and told them the copper rail had footage of the whole thing. One of the officers asked me about the punches I threw. He said, "You understand that you could also face charges depending on how this is reviewed." I said, "A man slapped my wife in front of me." I responded, "If you need to charge me for protecting her, then charge me, but you should probably watch the tape first." He wrote something down and didn't say anything else about it. They left and told us they would follow up. We got home around midnight. Colleen sat on the couch with the ice pack against her face, and I sat next to her, and our dog came over and put his head on her lap like he knew something was wrong, even though he had been asleep when we left. She was quiet for a long time. I didn't push her. I had learned over 9 years that Colleen processed things in silence first, and then spoke when the words were ready, and if you interrupted the silence, you got the wrong version. So I waited. Then she said, "I showed him my ring." That sentence sat in the room like something heavy that had been dropped. She showed him her ring. She did everything right. She said no. She turned away. She pulled her arm back. She showed him the proof that she was married, and he laughed at it and grabbed her anyway. She did everything society tells women to do when a man won't leave them alone, and none of it worked because the man didn't care. The ring didn't matter. The no didn't matter. The body language didn't matter. Nothing mattered to him except what he wanted, and what he wanted was for a woman to give him her number, and when she didn't, he punished her for it. That's what the slap was. It wasn't a loss of control. It was discipline. He was correcting her for the crime of refusing him. Colleen said, "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you weren't there." I said, "Don't do that." She said, "I'm serious. If we weren't doing our game, if I was just at a bar alone, nobody helped me. Nobody moved. Nobody said anything until you came over. All those people just watched." She was right. I had seen it too. The gasps, the turned heads, and then nothing. No one stepped between them. No one told him to stop. No one even called the bartender. They just watched the way people watch car accidents, which is with their mouths open and their feet planted exactly where they are. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed next to Colleen and stared at the ceiling and replayed every second. The sound of the slap, the way her head snapped to the side, the way he straightened his jacket after like he had just swatted a fly and not struck a human being, the way he said she should learn some manners. Manners. He hit my wife and called it a lesson in manners. 3 days later, the police called. They had reviewed the bar footage. The video clearly showed the man approaching Colleen, her repeatedly declining, him grabbing her wrist, and then the slap. It also showed that I didn't approach him until after he struck her. The officer said the footage supported self-defense of another person, and that no charges would be filed against me. The man's name was Vance Rourke. He was 38 years old. He worked for a financial consulting firm downtown. He drove a leased car that cost more than most people's annual salary. He had been arrested once before for disorderly conduct at a nightclub 2 years earlier. The charge was dismissed. He was the kind of man who had spent his entire adult life believing that consequences were for other people, and that the combination of money and confidence could get him out of anything. This time, it couldn't. They charged him with assault and battery. Colleen's medical records from the emergency room were entered as evidence along with the bar footage and the statements from multiple witnesses including Gabe and 2 other patrons who had seen everything. Vance hired a lawyer. Of course he did. His lawyer sent us a letter offering to settle the matter privately. He was willing to pay for Colleen's medical expenses and issue a formal apology if we agreed to drop the charges and sign a non-disclosure agreement. The letter referred to the incident as a misunderstanding that occurred in a social setting and was exacerbated by alcohol. Misunderstanding. He grabbed my wife's wrist. He slapped her face hard enough to leave a handprint, and his lawyer called it a misunderstanding exacerbated by alcohol. Colleen looked at the letter and laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was the sound of a woman reading a piece of paper that confirmed everything she already knew about how the world protects men who hurt women. She said, "Tell his lawyer we're not settling." I said, "Are you sure?" She said, "He hit me in front of a room full of people, and his first response was to offer money to make it go away. If I take that money, I'm telling him and every man like him that a woman's face has a price tag. We're not settling." I called our lawyer and told her to decline the offer. She did. She sent a 1-paragraph response that said the offer was rejected and that we intended to proceed with criminal prosecution. Vance's lawyer sent 2 more offers over the next month, each one higher than the last. The second offer was $25,000. The final offer was $40,000. $40,000. That was the number his lawyer decided a woman's face was worth. $40,000 to make the footage disappear and the charges dissolve and the whole thing fold up into a confidential settlement that nobody would ever hear about. Colleen didn't even read the final letter. I brought it home and set it on the kitchen table, and she glanced at it and said, "No." She didn't pick it up. She didn't open the envelope. She just said no and went back to making dinner. That was the angriest I ever saw her about the whole thing. Not the slap, not the trial, the number. The fact that someone sat in an office and calculated what her pain was worth and put it on paper and mailed it to our house like a bill in reverse. The case went to trial 4 months later. Colleen wore a gray dress and sat in the front row with her hands folded in her lap. I sat next to her. Our lawyer was a woman named Joanne who had spent 20 years handling assault cases and had a face that said she had heard every excuse a man could invent and was no longer interested in any of them. Vance showed up in a suit that probably cost more than my car payment. He was clean-shaven and he had a fresh haircut, and he looked like someone who had been coached to appear remorseful by a team of people who charged by the hour. His lawyer tried to paint the situation as a mutual altercation. He argued that Colleen had been flirtatious and had sent mixed signals by being alone at a bar on a Friday night, and that Vance had simply misjudged the interaction. He argued that the slap was a reflexive response to Colleen pulling her arm away aggressively, and that Vance felt threatened by the sudden movement. He said this out loud in a courtroom with a straight face, that a 6'2" man in a designer jacket felt physically threatened by a woman pulling her own wrist away from his uninvited grip. The judge did not seem impressed. She was an older woman with short gray hair, and she looked at Vance's lawyer the way you look at someone who has just said something so ridiculous that responding would dignify it. Our lawyer played the bar footage. The courtroom watched Colleen shake her head 3 times, watched her turn away, watched her pull her arm back, watched her hold up her left hand and show her wedding ring, watched Vance grab her wrist, watched him slap her across the face with a backhand that turned her head, watched him straighten his jacket, watched him adjust his cuffs. The footage played for 90 seconds, and the courtroom was completely silent for every single one of them. Colleen testified. She was calm and clear, and she described exactly what happened without embellishment or emotion. She said, "I told him I was married. I showed him my ring. He grabbed my wrist, and when I tried to free myself, he hit me." The judge asked Vance if he had anything to say. His lawyer started to speak for him, but the judge said, "I asked him." Vance stood up. He said, "I had too much to drink and I made a bad decision. I regret what happened." He did not say he was sorry. He did not say he was wrong. He said he made a bad decision the way someone would describe ordering the wrong thing at a restaurant, like the problem was judgment and not violence. The judge found him guilty. He was sentenced to 18 months of probation, mandatory anger management classes, 200 hours of community service, and a permanent restraining order from Colleen. His name went on a public record. His firm was notified. I found out later through a friend of a friend who worked in the same building that Vance was quietly let go from his company about 6 weeks after the trial. They cited restructuring. Nobody believed it. After the trial, Gabe told us the bar footage had been requested by 2 other women who said Vance had behaved aggressively toward them at other bars in the area. One incident was at a restaurant lounge about 3 miles from the Copper Rail. The other was at a rooftop bar downtown. Both women described similar patterns. Vance approaching uninvited, Vance ignoring clear refusals, Vance grabbing, Vance escalating when he didn't get what he wanted. Neither of them had reported him at the time. Neither of them had witnesses who would back them up. Neither of them had a husband sitting 10 feet away who saw the whole thing unfold. They had been alone, and they had stayed quiet because they thought nobody would believe them, and because reporting a well-dressed man with a good job for something that happened at a bar felt like a fight they would lose before it started. The footage from the Copper Rail changed that. It proved a pattern. One of them filed a report using the video as supporting evidence for her own case. Gabe gave her the footage personally. He told me later that he sat across from her while she watched it, and she cried for the entire 90 seconds because she said, "That's exactly what he did to me, and nobody saw it." Colleen and I went back to the Copper Rail the following Friday. Gabe had our drinks ready before we even sat down. He asked if we were still doing the opposite ends thing. Colleen looked at me. I looked at her. She said, "I think we're going to sit together for a while." We sat next to each other at the bar that night. No game, no pretend strangers, just a man and his wife sitting on 2 bar stools watching a basketball game and sharing a plate of fries and not saying much because we didn't need to. Halfway through her drink, Colleen reached over and took my hand and held it on the bar where anyone walking in could see it. She held it tight, not because she was scared, because she wanted to. A man at the end of the bar glanced over at us. He was young, maybe 25. He looked at Colleen, and then he looked at our hands clasped on the bar, and then he looked away and went back to his drink. I don't know if that man had any intentions at all. He probably didn't. He was probably just a guy having a beer on a Friday night. But I noticed him the way I notice everyone now, not with suspicion, with awareness. Because I learned something that night 4 months ago that I should have always known but didn't fully understand until I heard the sound of a hand hitting my wife's face in a room full of people who did nothing. The lesson was that the worst thing about that bar wasn't Vance. It was the silence around him. It was 30 people watching a woman get struck and not one of them moving. Not one of them raising a voice. Not one of them stepping between a man and the woman he had just hit. They gasped. They stared. And they stayed exactly where they were. I was the only one who moved, and the only reason I moved was because she was mine. That's the part that still bothers me. I didn't move because she was a woman being hurt. I moved because she was my wife being hurt, and I have to sit with that. Because if she had been a stranger sitting alone at the end of that bar with no husband 10 feet away, would I have done the same thing? I want to say yes, but I don't know. And the fact that I don't know is the thing that keeps me up at night more than the sound of the slap or the blood on his shirt or the look on Colleen's face when she realized nobody was coming to help her except the man she had married 9 years ago who happened to be sitting close enough to hear it. We still go to the Copper Rail. We still go on Fridays. We just sit together now, side by side, our hands on the bar where everyone can see them.